When I came to this school, I was surprised. Not to make generalizations, but I had come straight from a predominantly Southeast Asian Methodist school in Singapore to this secular British boarding school. The liberal views there became common sense here, and the conservative ones basically hate speech. I found myself in a bubble of like-minded teachers and classmates, and you get the sense that liberal views like protection and inclusivity are the status quo. For a moment, it feels like real change is happening. But then unsurprisingly, that bubble bursts. I had friends stop short mid-conversation to ask me for my political leaning, either afraid or deeming it pointless to share views I may not be receptive to. One girl even asked me if I was conservative before sharing her somewhat controversial views on climate change. In a seemingly liberal school, you had incredibly intelligent, articulate students hushing themselves, only revealing their true thoughts to those they knew shared them. As a 17-year-old, sometimes it's difficult to know what you think. With so much out there to be a part of, so many trains to hop onto, so many movements to enlist to, it's easy to be swept away on an umbrella of causes under which not every view corresponds with your own. And that got me thinking, why do I feel guilty, disillusioned with some of the views on the progressive side I'm supposedly on? Was it because of the way they were being enforced? The false sense of progress it gave me, or perhaps the outcome it was effectively having? I'm referring to political correctness. Political correctness has gotten quite a bad rep recently. It's become a derogatory term associated with offense and outrage culture, and essentially the left coming after free speech. It's also criticized for being anti-history, and on college campuses has been labeled the enemy of intellectual discourse. According to a 2018 study on America's polarized landscape, political correctness is devastatingly unpopular. 80% of Americans believe political correctness to be a problem. Yet, political correctness certainly feels like a large contributor to the so-called noise in today's media. Somehow, despite representing only 8% of the American population, the extreme left's progressive activists, otherwise known as the woke population, have an outsized role in political discourse. We all want a world where people are nice, where people are kind and have good manners. Naturally, we want intolerance to end. And that's what PC wants, isn't it? Political correctness aims to protect people from forms of expression perceived to exclude or insult already disadvantaged groups. That sounds innocent enough. So how did something like political correctness with its positive ideology and inclusive intentions end up as the enemy? Here's what the haters say. The biggest argument against political correctness is its so-called aims to censor and undermine our freedoms of speech and expression, be it in the day-to-day language we should be allowed to use, the speakers colleges should be allowed to invite, or the statues we should condone in our spaces. Political correctness and its mob of young warriors are being shot down by critics everywhere. We've all been told one time or another by a friend or otherwise that you're not allowed to say that anymore, it's politically incorrect. Now that's not too bad. If anything, I've learned what not to say if I don't want to come across as an asshole. That's not too far off from the mechanism society has always had to regulate crude speech. Social sanctioning, which follows that we've never really had such thing as absolute free speech. If someone mocked a person for their disability, they were cruel. And if they mocked someone for their race, they were prejudiced. Nothing is free. The cost of saying something is the risk depending on what is socially acceptable at the time. And thus, the character assassination and witch hunting, commonly associated with political correctness, is nothing new. It's simply social sanctioning rebranded and magnified into offense and outrage culture, thanks to social media's ability to provide everyone with a platform to express their judgments. It's when this protection and regulation is taken a step further to become law, as it did with the Canadian Gender Identity Rights Bill C-16 in June 2017, that perhaps what the critics say, that PC ironically seeks the rights for some through limiting the rights of others, may become true. The bill was criticized by many for penalizing citizens, refusing to use specific pronouns while referring to gender-diverse people. While the bill as it stands does not constitute misusing of pronouns as a criminal act, as it would have to be paired with hate speech or hate crimes, it is certainly a move in the direction of legislating politically correct language, a move that has created so much criticism and made me question PC as well. not because of its intentions, but because of the backlash it may cause. The legislating of politically correct language adds fuel to the fire by providing the power needed to drive, as well as dangerously increase the appeal of many critics' arguments that PC restricts their freedom of speech. Forcing people to change their language does not change their attitudes. Rather, forcing language on the people who aren't ready just fuels resentment. It's true, language has changed a lot in the past and will continue to change in the future, but that change arguably has to evolve organically through a general shift in the majority's consensus of what is socially acceptable. There's a gap between the progressive perception and the reality of public views on this issue, a gap that will take time to fill, and assuming they represent the views of the majority while in reality speak to a small minority will result in counterproductive backlash. The concerns of the anti-PC supermajority, caricatured as the humble Trump voter who just doesn't know what's allowed anymore, can't be downplayed. In fact, political correctness and its backlash may have helped Trump win the election. Voters who cited political correctness as an issue were particularly taken with Trump's intentionally anti-PC persona, and anger against political correctness was the top indicator of whether somebody voted Republican in 2016. Not just that, but in certain ways, political correctness has started a war within the progressive movement, alienating potential allies and traditional liberals by hectoring their lack of sensitivity, something I'm sure a lot of us have felt before. What about on college campuses? Well, critics worry that young people these days are more worried with minimizing hurt feelings than promoting progress, with inclusivity than resilience. In the name of being safe and PC, they've threatened to suffocate intellectual discourse and freedoms of expression in the very places they should exist most, universities. In fact, traditional, religious, and conservative students are starting to feel unsafe expressing themselves in colleges. Closeted conservatives have apparently become a thing. People scared to come out as conservative or as Trump supporters are largely credited with the shockingly inaccurate polls for Brexit and Trump. In the UK, reports show that 9 out of 10 universities restrict free speech, ranging from Newcastle banning students from dressing up as Caitlyn Jenner during Halloween, to countless universities canceling, banning, or protesting certain selected academics and guest speakers labeled too controversial from appearing on campus. Values of free speech, prized in Western society, appear threatened by political correctness. However, I think otherwise. Take the Roads Must Fall movement of 2015 Oxford, for example. Yes, it failed, but regardless of whether you believe statues whose purpose are to honor and celebrate should be allowed to depict men whose views we no longer endorse and who represent the large-scale subjugation of others, the movement to take it down did not limit discourse, like its many critics, including University of Oxford Chancellor himself, Chris Patten, stressed it would. Instead, it started so much conversation. Debates were opened, petitions were signed, comments from both academics and students, and letters were written and received by the university from both sides. The very fact that I, who knew nothing about Rhodes or about Oxford, now know who he was, what he did, and how these colonial ideas are still dangerous and prevalent in society, shows the effectiveness and need for PC. PC is publicity for discourse, for change. The movement became a guide for conversation to surround and created an environment of dispute and debate, the exact opposite of what critics said it would do. My views on PC have always been mixed. Yes, it has its flaws. Sometimes intentions and effects don't match. Maybe you don't fight colonialism and its legacy by pulling down statues, and maybe you can't change people's minds by changing their language. Only time will tell. What we do know is PC, if anything, has at least made us more aware of what we say, the context, connotations, and histories of the words we use and the things we see. And for that reason, I believe political correctness is still useful to society. My original disillusionment with political correctness through the process of planning this talk has made me realize that it's actually not so bad. In fact, despite its annoyances and flaws, it is necessary. And I'm conscious when I say this, as I know my views may change in the future, but I hope political correctness, rather than erasing history and discourse, done right, can create an environment that promotes more reflection, more questioning, and more progress. Thank you.